about 300 kilometers from Halifax, Nova Scotia, or 156 kilometers from the closest point on the mainland, sits an island. A couple of sand dunes, really. Now, it's a place that is on the bucket list for so many people, a place of hiking and exploration. Anybody can actually go there. It's a national park reserve after all, but you have to apply for permission to go, and only a few hundred people a year actually make it. It is a place best known for its wild horses, Sable Island, and that's where my walkabout finds me today. And there it is, Sable Island. Now the interesting thing is if this was in the Caribbean, you would probably find resorts up and down this beach at this point. But I mean, you can see like animals up and down.
Sable Island was not always a national park. In fact, it wasn't until 2013 that it became the Sable Island National Park Reserve, becoming at that point Canada's 43rd national park. It became Nova Scotia's 3rd national park after Cape Breton Highlands, which was formed in 1936, and Kejimkujik, which was formed in 1967. Now, at many national parks across Canada, you will find these red chairs at key points, often at a very difficult point to reach, and, well, Sable Island is not easy to reach in the first place. Now, something special about this, the sign in particular. This sign is built so that you can actually tip it over when the winds get high. The winds are very high today. Or you can fill this with sand so that it weighs it down. That's really important somewhere like this where everything keeps moving all the time. Lighthouses have moved on Sable Island. Sable Island is a little different than many hiking destinations. There are no real designated pathways. In fact, the pathways that there are actually the horse paths, and that's what you take. Sable Island is also not very big. I'm standing here and I can see South Beach over there, and I'm standing almost on top of North Beach. It's only about 1.3 to 1.6 kilometers wide, and it's 45 kilometers long. So you are not going to see the entire thing in one hiking adventure. Sable Island is internationally known for its wild horses. It's the thing people come here for. I mean, of course, scientists come here to study all manner of different organisms, but it's the horses that really make Sable Island special in the minds of so many around the world. There are 500 or so horses on this island, although that number has fluctuated over the centuries. 350, over 500 sometimes. Now, when I was growing up in Nova Scotia, I was always told that these horses originated from a shipwreck. Well, it turns out that's a bit of an urban myth, or an island myth. Genetic testing has shown that that simply is not the case. These horses were brought here intentionally. The first horses were believed to have arrived on this island in 1750, after having been seized by the British during the expulsion of the Acadians. Records suggest that a Boston merchant named Thomas Hancock had been paid to transfer Acadians to the American colonies, and he either bought or stole the horses belonging to the Acadians and brought them here along with cows, sheep, goats, and pigs. His idea, apparently, was that Sable Island would become a breeding colony for various farm animals, and he would come to harvest them periodically while the population grew, giving him a continuous income source. That didn't really work out, and while the other livestock disappeared over time, the horses remained. So the horses on Sable Island were actually ridden by people working at the life-saving stations. That allowed them to get between the different stations. They actually brought stallions over at one point to try and improve the breeding stock here. There have been other uses of the horses. They've been taken off for all kinds of things. Some were taken off to take to the Shubenacadie Wildlife Park. They were also taken to be used in the mines in Cape Breton to haul carts out. And if you've ever been to the Glace Bay Miners Museum, you'll see a model down in the shaft that shows you how they were used. They were also made famous in the CBC series, Pit Pony, which was about those very coal mines. By the late 1950s, the population of horses on Sable had dwindled, primarily due to their removal. The Canadian government at this point proposed taking all the horses off the island, and there were two reasons. First, it was thought the horses were damaging the ecosystem of Sable. And second, it was believed that the island's winter conditions were too harsh for the horses to live comfortably, and that they were suffering. This was an odd belief, given that the horses by this point had been on the island for over 200 years. By 1960, a plan was finalized to remove the horses and sell them. The Canadian public was outraged. A public letter-writing campaign began. One newspaper claimed in a headline that the ponies of Sable Island were destined to become dog food. Others reported that the horses could be sold to make glue or work in the coal mines like some had before. So it was blowback from the public and a letter-writing campaign by school children that forced the John Diefenbaker government to change course and prohibit the removal of horses from this island. They actually went one step further. In 1961, they amended the Canada Shipping Act to prohibit interference with the horses on Sable Island. Now, that was really important because until 2002, Sable Island's wild horses were the only non-migratory species in Canada that were protected.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I'm on Sable Island, about 300 kilometers southeast of Halifax. I'm exploring the island, checking out all the things that it has to offer. Now, one of the things that you'll find here is not good, and that's balloons. You ever wonder what happens when you release a balloon into the sky? Well, every year, thousands of them end up on Sable Island, on the beaches. And these balloons, they don't biodegrade, and they're dangerous to wildlife. So think about that the next time you're considering releasing a balloon into the air. This one actually has an under the sea theme, which I guess is a bit ironic. Life is hard on this island for any species, but particularly for horses. And of course, winter is the harshest of the seasons. On average, 76 foals are born on this island every year, and 64 horses die, which means the population is generally increasing, but that varies from year to year and depending on the weather conditions from year to year. Now, when horses die, they are tagged. See here, the skull is tagged, and all of the horses are tracked. But unlike a lot of other animals, they are not tagged when they're alive. As you might expect, there is a lot of research related to horses on Sable Island. One research program involves tracking each living horse, including data on reproduction, habitat, movement, and so forth. And where possible, DNA, hormone, and parasite loads are measured from the feces. The average age of horses here is between 5 and 10 years, much shorter than domestic horses. One of the ways that horses are protected on this island is that you must stay at least 20 meters away from them at all times. And that's to protect the horses. If they come closer, you have to move away. There's only one exception. In some cases, researchers are allowed to get closer, but of course they're working under a research permit. The horses here are considered both wild and naturalized under Canada's National Parks Act and the Canadian wildlife regulations. This means that they don't depend on humans for survival and live and breed as wild animals. The Committee on the Status of Wildlife in Canada and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature define wild as an animal that has been in their present habitat for 50 years or more. Now, in fact, because the population of horses is so small, they would not only be considered wild, but also endangered. In fact, at very high risk, despite the fact the population is now relatively stable. One of the things you notice when you come to Sable Island is there are no trees. Well, except this one. This one is now dead in the past couple of days, according to some ecologists here. This had survived as the only tree for a long time. It was sometimes referred to as sort of the little bonsai stunted tree. It met its demise because horses have used this as a scratching post, and just recently the last bits of live growth have come off of it. So when we say dunes get eroded by the forces of nature, that can happen in all different ways. This is cut off along here in part because the horses are actually using it as a scratching post of sorts. And you can watch them actually rubbing themselves up against this to get rid of an itch. If you've been to Cape Breton Highlands National Park and visited the Skyline Trail, then you'd be familiar with the moose exclosures. Those fenced areas are intended to keep moose out and see whether the vegetation will regrow. Well, here on Sable Island, they have their own version of that exclosure, except this one is for the horses. And these exclosures will be in place for the next 4 or 5 years in order to determine whether there are differences in erosion patterns, the type of species that grow, and even how much the different grasses grow when horses are excluded. While you may think that the horses would live as one group, in fact, they live as small family groups with one dominant stallion. The family groups don't welcome outsiders. Scientists have discovered that if a horse smells one from another family, it will be chased away. The horse's coat has adapted to the conditions and is tougher than their domestic cousins, presumably to help ward off the wind and the cold. They've also adapted to eating the grass on the island, which is often laden with sand. But part of that adaptation has not led to stronger teeth. And so one reason for the shorter lifespan is related to the fact the sand wears down the teeth of the horses, eventually making it difficult for them to eat. So the dunes. They are perhaps the most obvious part of the landscape here on Sable Island. But those dunes wouldn't exist if it were not for marram, or dune grass, and you can see it there. That's what helps stabilize the sand and create the hills that you see. Now, the way dune grass works is it has rhizomes or root systems, and those roots crawl beneath the sand and the grass rises. Then as sand blows in on a windy day like this, it actually collects around the grass. Now, the other thing that does not happen on a windy day is that the sand doesn't get blown off the dunes, eliminating them. And that's really why Sable Island exists, is because of that grass. And the horses, as I said, not their favorite grass, but if you look all around me, there is lots of horse dung, and there is plenty of marram grass in that dung. So this is a sand dune, surrounded by salt water. So the question becomes, where do you get fresh water? After all, birds and horses, all kinds of wildlife, humans, they all need potable water. Then you see these freshwater ponds and you think to yourself, well, that must be the answer. But the ponds aren't that big unto themselves. Under this island, there is a freshwater table that runs the entire length of the island. It is called a lens, and what happens is the fresh water, which has a lower density, actually sits above the salt water. And if you have ever gone scuba diving in a cenote, you will have experienced this phenomenon where the two blend, and the water can actually be pulled from the top part of that lens. Here, the horses are drinking from the ponds. Down at the other end of the island, the horses can actually dig small wells and get at that water themselves, where the ponds have actually dried up. Hydrology and that study of water on this island has become really important, and this has become a really important place for understanding how that water table works.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
You know, there was livestock on this island going back to at least the 1500s, and there were a lot of different reasons for having livestock here. Some was to supply food for shipwreck crews. Some was because people thought that if they brought cattle, cows, pigs here, they would breed and then they could be harvested and sold back on the mainland. And some of it was for people who lived on this island. So residents here tried a number of times to introduce rabbits. The first time, the rabbits were killed by owls and by rats. The second time, the rabbits actually multiplied. It was very successful, too successful, so they brought in cats. And then the cats became too numerous, so they brought in foxes to control those. Well, then, you know what happened. The foxes became too numerous, so in 1897, they decided they had to shoot the foxes to get rid of them because the foxes were killing the birds on the island. Well, that pretty much put an end to the experimentation of introduced species on this island. But the horses remained. It's not just horses that are protected in this area. Off the eastern end of this island is the Gully Marine Protected Area. Now, the Gully is the location of the deepest underwater canyon in all of the North Atlantic. And that canyon is home to the endangered bottlenose whale, as well as many other species, including deep cold water corals. The Gully became Atlantic Canada's first marine protected area in 2004, and it's home to more than 16 species of whale and dolphin, including the blue whale, which is the largest mammal on the planet. The cold water corals that grow here can reach over 1,000 years old. Like mountains and canyons on land, the Gully was formed by the movement of melting glaciers, and if you could remove all the water and visit it, it would appear like a mountain range with sandy breaks and plains bisected by a deep crevice. The bottlenose whales populate the Gully to feed on squid, but there is so much more to that in this area, with a diversity of habitat that is home to animals like swordfish, tuna, sharks, seabirds, and otherworldly creatures like lanternfish, anemones, and brittle stars. The United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association considers the Gully one of the most unique marine habitats anywhere in the world. It plunges to depths of over 3,000 meters. That's over 3 kilometers deep. And it's home to a vast array of species. Species that only live in the deep water that you would never see on a beach along the mainland or even along a beach here at Sable Island. While known for horses, Sable Island is actually home to the world's largest breeding colony of gray seals. Some live here year-round, but over 400,000 come here in the winter to breed. And it's not just gray seals. Sable Island is also home to harbor seals, harp seals, and hood seals. Sable Island is close to excellent feeding grounds for breeding seals, but only harbor and gray seals actually breed on the island. As Canada's largest seal, gray seals can weigh up to 1,000 pounds. And because they will feed on a wide variety of fish species, they are less susceptible to crashes in particular fish stocks. The beaches here offer lots of undisturbed space, and while large shark populations are a concern for the seals, with no land-based predators, they have lots of safe spaces to come ashore, to molt, rest, pup, and breed. So the increase in the seal population here can be largely attributed to a decline in hunting. In fact, there's no hunting on this island at all. In 1895, 1,000 seal skins were taken from here, as well as hundreds of barrels of seal oil. Now, these days, in the Maritimes, there is a very small seal hunt, but it is nothing like it used to be. This island is littered with dead animals, of course, being home to so many different species of wildlife, that's to be expected, but it's not something you see on the mainland because, of course, when a seal washes up on the beach or something like that, it's promptly removed. But here is the remains of a dead seal. You can see the skin, the skull, and there's another one just over here. Do you ever think that you eat a lot? Well, adult male gray seals eat 15.4 pounds of food a day, and female gray seals, well, they eat 11 pounds. The cycle of life and death continues here on Sable Island, and it's not just seals and horses. This is a Riso dolphin that has passed away and washed up on shore. You know, Sable Island was once home to more than just the animals that are here today. At one time, over 100,000 walrus lived in the maritime waters, many of them calling this place home. In fact, 278 or so skulls have been recovered from these beaches. Now, by the 1700s, the walrus had become extinct, most probably due to hunting for the tusks, which was a lot like elephant ivory. Now, DNA analysis on the remains that have been found on Sable Island indicates that the walrus who lived here were pretty much a different species than the northern walrus we're familiar with today. The maritime walrus were much bigger and potentially much more aggressive. Well, as I make it back to the operational center and the helipad, I am reminded that this is in fact one of the few actual trails or roads here. Most of it is horse paths, or you find your way through the ever-changing dunes. But it's beauty wherever you end up. And if you have the chance to come here, any path you take will take you somewhere really special. As Walt Disney once said, if you don't know where you want to go, it doesn't matter what path you take. Well, I hope your next walkabout is as awe-inspiring as this place.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.